Well,
I just want to say what a pleasure it is. I've known Esther for almost 20 years now. It's a long time. And she, over all that time period, has just had an amazing talent to identify things that are just over the horizon and bring them to the fore, find people and connect people so that they become even better than they were. And it's just an amazing talent. It's great to be here.
I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled that John is here because unlike Rich Carlgard and Mike Malone, who were so well prepared and had 10 points, we are totally going to wing it. But I do want to mention, actually, I'm really happy to see Guy Haftek win the award because I'm an investor.
Ah, that's perfect.
So congratulations. We really are not very prepared, and I wanted to start with a story about why change is so different. Then we'll engage in some conversation. I have a few notes here, and pretty soon we're going to run out of material. So these guys are going to have to ask us some questions.
Exactly.
So this is a very old story back from when we first met, because you couldn't tell this story in polite company anymore. And it's about the difficulty of change, because when you tell a woman in particular, maybe if I told you I really love your beard, you would think, gee, how did I look before? And feel self-conscious about having changed to the bearded look and be embarrassed that maybe you looked really kind of not so good before without all that facial hair. Change is tough because it means rejecting the past. It means rejecting a past belief. It means rejecting the way things were done. It means saying, I've been mistaken all these years. And people are admired for sticking to their convictions. People are admired for having a firm point of view. And that point where you move from, gee, I really like being hairless, to I really would like to be a hairy guy with a full beard, it's very hard because you feel as if you're abandoning something that you stood up for. You feel that you have to question the way things were done in order to adopt something new. It sounds a little excessive maybe, but it's very true. It's the worst time is when you're about to change your mind, whether it's about working for the company you work for, should you leave, a relationship you have, should you abandon this person instead of trying to make it work, the theory you have, the approach you have to doing business, just about anything. Emotionally is really hard. Your turn. Like that beard.
You know, it's interesting to me. You talk about how difficult it is to abandon something that you have. And this came up earlier in one of the sessions this morning, and I think it's worth reflecting on, which is the question of when we were kids, we had no trouble abandoning what we had or what we believed, or, you know, it was a constant excitement about what's next, what's the next thing that can occupy my attention. And I see, you know, and I think a lot of people would say, well, you know, you mature over time and you have responsibilities. But at another level, I have a suspicion that we live in a society and we have a set of institutions in particular that discourage change, that want us to be consistent, want us to be predictable, want us to be reliable. And over time, we lose that natural human instinct to be excited about change, as opposed to, oh my God, you know, I've got to abandon something I believed for all these years.
I don't know, you must have had a really happy childhood. What about Linus and his blanket? What about the kid who doesn't want to go to camp because he misses his parents?
I don't want to say that everything is excitement, for sure, but I just am struck by the contrast when I watch young kids in action And the contrast. I mean, it comes to a related thing. I've become more and more interested in the topic of passion and its relationship to performance. And I'm struck by the number of people who come up to me and say, you know, it's really good that maybe you have passion, and maybe some of the people you know have passion, but most people don't have passion. And it's unrealistic to expect people to have passion. But when I, again, go back and watch children, man, they're all passionate.
Well, they have curiosity, and they're not afraid of breaking things. They kind of think there's an undo button, no matter what.
Right.
Sometimes they're wrong.
Yeah.
And to some extent, perhaps that's what, quote, maturing means. You realize there's no undo button. But if you mature beyond that, you realize there may be no undo button, but as long as I'm still alive,
life goes on, right?
You know, people sometimes are afraid to think, well, what is the worst thing that could happen? So I do a lot of stuff on the genome, and people say, gee, I'm not sure I really want to find out what's in my genes. First of all, they're wrong. They don't really predict that much. They give you probabilities. But then I tell them, well, imagine a chart. It's a completely round pie chart. Has a little slice in it. That little slice says, well, the whole chart says dead or alive after 140 years. The little slice is the maybe I'd be alive part. And if you look at almost anything and you consider, well, what are the worst consequences of this change? Will I still have my job? Maybe not. Will I still be able to get a job? Probably yes. Will I still have my family? So to some extent, you have to be unafraid to explore the good and the bad possibilities. And then you trade that off against the good part of the change. It's easier. But if you just kind of dismissively say, well, that's too risky, that's too dangerous, it might not work out, you never look at it analytically enough to make the change that might be worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting aspect. I talked about institutions and their impact in terms of changing our mindset and orientation towards life. There's another aspect of this which I've also become more interested in over time, which is the cognitive biases that come into play in times of great change and uncertainty. You know, what kinds of biases do those kinds of environments create in us? And I think one of them is the notion that as things change more and more rapidly and uncertainty increases, I mean, predictable change you can deal with, even if you know the trajectory and exactly where it's going.
Like the seasons or somebody's getting older or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a different thing versus unpredictable change where you have no idea where this is headed and all kinds of possibilities. I think there's an interesting human reaction that we all have, which is to magnify the perception of risk and discount the perception of reward. So we get exactly into that kind of bind that you're talking about, which is, oh my God, I can think of all the things that could go wrong. You know?
And so in your head, there's 400% chance of dying if you add up all the different ways you could die.
Exactly.
And yet I want to say something slightly heretical, which is, this conference is about change. The word that people use even more glibly to mean goodness is innovation.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like change itself is not good. Innovation itself is not good. It needs to be change for the better, change for something useful.
Yes.
So sometimes I spend a lot of time all over the world, and I would say that West Europeans don't like change, more or less. This is a horrible generalization, and excuse me, the people from Shell and England and so forth. But there's a sense of things work well enough. We don't need all this disruption. That may, in fact, be changing now, given what's going on. People in the United States tend to say, oh, wow, change, that's great. Especially at conferences of serious-minded business people looking for a competitive advantage.
And especially Silicon Valley.
Yes,
right.
Well, and then you have people in Eastern Europe or emerging markets, and they say, yeah, change. Things are changing around us rapidly. We want good change. We don't want bad change. Let's examine whatever this innovation or change is and see whether it will work. And that's the attitude I like the best, to sort of assume that there's going to be change and innovation. Things are changing around you, but which ones are good and which aren't, and actually examine the usefulness of the particular innovation or change.
It's interesting to me, and it ties to something I know you've been very interested in, which is the impact in our lives of narratives and how it's playing out in politics right now. I describe myself as a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist, and right now I am such a short-term pessimist, particularly about our political system. And it's because we have adopted a set of narratives on both sides, I think, which are ultimately threat-based narratives. You know, the Republicans, we're under attack by terrorists, they're going to get us. Internally, we've got these secularists who are going after our family values and destroying our civilization. The Democrats on the other side.
Well, don't forget, the government is trying to run our lives. That's a very important part.
No, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Evil Washington. And then on the other side, you've got the Democrats, where those mega millionaires on Wall Street are out to get our jobs. We're going to lose our jobs if we don't act now. And by the way, all these polluters are destroying our environment. We're going to face global catastrophe. And it's all about threat. And I think it goes back to this issue of change being good or bad. Here, I think it drives us to I think an ironic respect on both sides, to a kind of more conservative mindset of holding on to what we have.
Right. Don't listen to the other guys, because they might actually have a point.
Right. Head into the bunkers, hold on to what we have, protect what we have, and otherwise we're going to be destroyed. And I just worry about the impact of those threat-based narratives on the opportunity for positive change.
Well, so the irony, which was really well described by some guy in some conservative magazine that I picked up at the airport, but you have these two parties. They're both fighting for a system in which the incumbent party controls everything. They just both want to be that incumbent party. And in a sense, they both want how the country is run to be determined by the party in power in Washington. And neither party really listens to the electorate. They listen to the people who give them money in order to get votes from the people who give them votes. And the real change that we need is to change back to a system where a party represents the people who voted for it rather than simply tries to keep itself in power. Yeah. Please clap. I see this a lot in the Middle East. So I wanted to talk a bit about regime change, both here, and again, here it's not a change of party, it's actually a change of regime. How does, not the people in power, but the system by which they get power and maintain it. It's more than just campaign reform. I mean, I wish I could. This is not the place to go into it at great length, but it's a real issue. In a lot of countries, Ukraine is one example. In Egypt, in all these places, it's not good enough to get rid of the guys at the top. You need to change the electorate so that they demand a government, not simply a leader, that gives them a whole new power structure, a new administration. In Russia, the trick is not to replace Putin. The trick is to replace the system that brought him to power. It's a system of corruption. It's a system of laws selectively enforced. It's all these kinds of things. What's interesting is in many of these places, suddenly things are changing, and I think it's partly because of social networks, but it's not, oh gee, we can organize a protest with Facebook. It's more, in most of these places, the government controlled a lot. In communist countries, it controlled the economy, it controlled their jobs, it controlled the movies they saw. In a bunch of dictatorships, people were personally fairly free, but they had no resources because the king or whatever controlled the economy along with his family or his friends or whatever. Suddenly now, people are making choices. They can go online, they can find stuff out, they can ask questions. But most importantly, they can write their own history. Mm-hmm. They're putting themselves up on Facebook, and they can no longer be disappeared. They can be silenced one by one, but their voices live on. And that changes dramatically their sense of self, their identity, everything. And
yeah.
It's something people don't get here yet. How, because we're used to this. We talked freely, we were visible and present before we were online. For many people, getting online made the difference.
I think it is a profound catalyst for change, and again, that's in some respects my optimism is that we are now living in a world with a digital technology infrastructure that is going to make it harder and harder to contain and close down and hold people in ways that were much more feasible in the past. The thing that I worry about in that context, though, is I still have a sense when I look at a lot of these opposition movements that have emerged in various parts of the world, that they're still, in their own kind of way, very much driven by a threat-based narrative of their own. You know, the threat is we've got a dictator, we've got a corrupt regime, we've got a set of people that don't value our freedom. But the ability to define a clear opportunity is where I still see a problem.
I'd say it's optimistic, but it's unschooled. I mean,
yes.
So one of my favorite stories was from Russia back in 1991. This was right after Yeltsin came into power and the Soviet Union was dissolved, and some CNN anchor found some woman in the street who was, how should we say, a middle-aged woman. She was not a specimen of an old lady. She was somebody whose opinion was being sought as an intelligent part of the electorate. And they asked her, so how do you feel about things? And she said, oh, I'm very optimistic. Maybe now we can get what we were promised, as opposed to maybe now we can build what we were promised. And then there was the guy who said, this is so exciting, our government is going to set free market prices just like yours. And in Egypt, they don't understand, or some of them do, some don't, but the challenge, again, people were really optimistic. You know, now we're going to have our own country, we're going to be proud and have dignity, we're going to vote. They didn't understand the kind of heavy lifting challenge of building an economy, building an administration, delivering education to a large population. This is a segue, but much like I think many entrepreneurs nowadays, they build an app, but they have no idea what it means to build a company that can deliver apps over time, support them over time. Silicon Valley is just as, in some sense, bedazzled by the hero entrepreneur myth as many places are bedazzled by the free country myth. It's not that easy.
No. I wanted to go back because one of the things that attracted me to this session was the title. I love ambiguity and paradox, and the title of the session is Change is Irresistible. And irresistible can have many different meanings. So there's one meaning which is that change is going to happen to you, and so resistance is futile, as they like to say. And on the other side, change is irresistible in the same sense that I find chocolate irresistible. I'm irresistibly pulled to chocolate wherever it resides. And I think it's an interesting question to potentially get some engagement from the audience around as we go into Q&A, but which of these apply? Is it that we're being forced into change and you can't avoid it, or you're drawn into it because of some quest that you're on?
I think both. I mean, or either, or for any particular person, some change is irresistible, some change is scary, and you want to resist, but you can't.
Yeah.
Partly it depends on, well, do you like your current situation? Do you want to change it?
Yes.
But there's lots of research that shows people will cling to the familiar even when they want change. I think the dramatic tension is really a timing thing. Short-term gratification, short-term security versus the long-term change you want, but you can't do it every day.
It's interesting because, again, I've been reflecting a lot on these cognitive biases in times of high uncertainty, and I mentioned this notion of magnifying a perception of risk, discounting perception of reward. I think there's a parallel one, which is shrinking time horizons.
Yeah.
Things are so uncertain, I can't afford to think about, 5 years from now.
Well, another Russia story. When I first got there, you couldn't get anybody to make an appointment more than a day in advance. You'd say, I'm coming to Moscow at the end of the month, and they'd say, great, call me when you arrive. So you arrive, and you say, well, how about next Wednesday? It's now Thursday of the week before. Well, check back with me on Monday. Maybe Wednesday would work. Then you call on Monday, and they say, yes, tentatively lunch on Wednesday. Call me tomorrow to confirm. Everything was like a snow day. We'll do our best, but if we fail, there were circumstances beyond our control. And the famous Russian prime minister who said, in his State of the Union speech, no less, we did our best, but things turned out as usual. So this uncertainty is tremendously debilitating. People are afraid to commit. They're afraid to make decisions. I mean, you see it now in our economy. Companies aren't investing. It's not because interest rates are too high.
No. Yeah, it's interesting. This whole question of the orientation towards change and the extent to which your environment can affect that. One of the reasons I've gotten more interested in the topic of passion, which, for the clients that I deal with, which are typically
Deloitte's clients want to know about passion?
No, Deloitte's clients, when I go talk to them about passion, they kind of look at me, twisting their head this way and that, and finally somebody asks me, where are you from, John? And I say, oh, I'm from California. And all of a sudden I get these knowing nods from around the table. Well, oh, he's one of those. One of those new age types, he believes in fulfillment. I actually came to it from a very different angle, which is the notion of performance. And I believe we're in an environment that is demanding sustained extreme performance improvement. And so the question is, where do you see that? And how do you get that? And from our experience, where you see it is typically, first of all, not in most work environments. You have to go to things like extreme sports, big wave surfing being a great example, or to online video game environments like World of Warcraft, where you see sustained extreme performance improvement. And the common element across all these environments that are quite diverse is passion of the participants. And the way I tie it back to the executives that who are still looking at me and maybe allowing me to continue for a while is to say, imagine a frontline worker in your company who confronts an exception, something that wasn't anticipated, wasn't part of the plan. What's the reaction of that worker? And from my experience, most workers are not passionate, and the response of the average worker is, first of all, to ignore it, hope it goes away. It sometimes does go away, and that's great. If it doesn't, they try to ignore it, but sometimes it has to be addressed, and so they try to paper it over and just get back to the assigned task. That's the orientation.
I thought mostly they would just say, "Oh, good, I can stop working."
No. Well, if it's that level of exception, yes, I can go home. Wait for somebody to fix it. But on the other hand, the passionate worker, when confronted with an exception at work, their reaction is, "Wow, that's really interesting. I never saw that before. This is a chance to really think through something and push myself to the next level." And I turn to the executives and I say, if you're serious about sustained extreme performance improvement, which worker do you want in your front line? And the passionate worker, I believe, is going to deliver that. And so they're the ones embracing change. And in fact, if they don't have change, they get bored and they want to leave.
Or you can use another word for passionate, which is curious. It's that some other guy said that most inventions don't begin with eureka. They begin with, "That's funny."
Yes.
And
yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
How did that?
This mold, there's no more disease. However penicillin was discovered, it killed a whole bunch of things in the petri dish. That kind of thing.
Yeah. The distinction I would make, though, between curiosity and passion, and I think passionate people are intrinsically curious, is curiosity is a more passive kind of event. It's, wow, that's really interesting. Let me learn about it. Let me find out about it. Versus, to me, a passionate person is one who goes to the next level of saying, I want to do something about it. I want to make a difference. And so, yes, I'm curious, because to make a difference, I have to learn about things and get to the next level. But the key for the passionate person is, I want to make a difference. I don't want to just read about it, find out about it. I want to apply it.
And in the spirit of news you can use, in a marketplace now where anybody can copy what you're doing almost overnight.
Yes.
The only thing that differentiates you is your people, one way or another, whether it's their customer service or their ability to have that passion and develop the next version of the product sooner, faster, better.
Yeah, it's that continual questing, getting to that next level and never sitting back and saying, wow, good, I've done it. Now I can relax.
So should we relax and let people ask? The only other thing I want to talk about at some point is regime change within companies, but I'll let somebody ask about that.
Excellent.
Okay.
Business school. Is it on?
It's on now, I think.
The topic that is interesting as a spin-off of what you're talking about, passionate work is different than well-being and happiness, particularly societal. The Valley is very well known for having passionate people, many of whom burn out and many of whom are very unhappy. Yet places like Australia or New Zealand may not have as much innovation, but generally people there have a sense of well-being and are generally happy with their lives. And Daniel Kahneman has talked about this in terms of the experiencing self, of what we experience in the moment, and the remembering self. What is the narrative that we have? So taking it out of the workplace in terms of being incredibly productive and innovative and coming up with the next chip, what is it that you've learned about happiness and well-being and I believe Deepak Chopra talks about this in terms of engagement, that if somebody is engaged at work, not necessarily passionate, but engaged and feel that they're doing something that has a higher value, they're far more happier than the person who's continually passionate and says, boy, I can improve it. So I'd like you to talk a little bit in that dimension, if you would.
Wow. Where to start? So engagement, I think, is important. Let me go back to Silicon Valley. First of all, my experience, and I'm just getting into this, I'm still on the edge of passion. My experience is that passionate people are different from obsessive people, number one. I think that's often confused, and people often view obsession as kind of an extreme form of passion. I view them as total opposite ends of the spectrum. Passionate people, almost by instinct, because they're in this for the long term, they want to make a difference throughout their life. It's not just about getting the project done, getting the company built. It's about a commitment to make a difference throughout your life.
Meaningfulness.
Yes. And as a result, they pace themselves. Passionate people, in the way I'm talking about, don't burn out. They're in it. They're the marathoners. They're not in it for the sprint. And so they don't burn out. They pace themselves, and they're constantly trying to get the right balance so that they can make a difference going forward. So I think that's an interesting contrast to reflect on. I think the notion of engaged people being happy, absolutely. You know, to me, that's the definition of engagement in work, is are you happy with the work you're doing and with the people you're working with? And that's great. I'd say, in fact, for most U.S. companies, in fact, probably most companies around the world, levels of engagement are tiny. But passion is, to me, the next level. It's the notion of, I'm not just happy with the work I'm doing. In fact, I may be really dissatisfied, frustrated, because I see all the opportunities and I see the barriers that have been put in my way to making that kind of impact. So they're frustrated, but I think at the end of the day, they're much happier because over time, they are making a difference. And I think ultimately, all of us as human beings want to make a difference. It may be in a very small sphere, small part of our lives, but we want to know we're making a difference, and we'd like to know that we can make increasing difference over time. And so I'm sorry, I'm just passionate about the topic.
Just a short response. I think people who are workaholics count what they do. People who are passionate value what they do.
Yeah.
So now let's do the next question. If there is one. Oh. Yes.
A couple over there.
Oh. The women with, you all have green things. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'm supposed to be picking you guys, but anyway, yes.
Hi, Esther. Tom.
Oh.
Tom Buckholtz. Just a quick invitation to reopen the passion curiosity statements John made before. You may have bailed yourself out slightly with the word obsession, but maybe not. And I'd invite some remarks about passion versus curiosity, or passion with curiosity, in American politics at the moment.
What was the question?
I'd invite relook at passion implies curiosity with respect to American politics at the moment. I suspect there are a lot of passionate people with no curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll make a distinction. One of the things that I'm exploring is that I find that when I use the term passion, first of all, I get nods from people, and they say, I think they're in agreement, and I find out they have a completely different definition of passion. So I wanted to differentiate. Part of my work now is developing a taxonomy of passion, and differentiate two types of passion. There's the passion of the true believer. And I actually believe many of the people in Silicon Valley have the passion of the true believer. I would say most fundamentalist religions have the passion of the true believer, which is the passion that says, I know the destination. I know exactly where we need to go, and I know exactly the path that we need to travel to get to that destination.
And you're not on it.
And you're not on it, and if you ask me questions, get out of my way, because I don't have time. I'm on my path. And I think that's where a lot of U.S. politics is right now, the passion of the true believer. Difference is passion of the explorer, which is a passion that is a commitment, a long-term, in many cases lifelong commitment to a domain. And it's an excitement that I don't know where I'm going to end up. I have no idea in this domain where I'm going to end up.
And it's a commitment, to come back to our topic, to change to
to
your
making a
model
difference
of the truth, to change your framework for looking at things, to learn new stuff.
And it's that excitement that you're going to change.
Or to answer new questions. That's you, yeah.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So I want to pick up on this point that you raised before that I strongly agree with, that all change and innovation isn't by definition good. And one of the issues I've been grappling with lately is this idea of the future of humanity and where are we heading. And some of the experienced and successful people I know in a lot of sectors have said to me, I don't think we're going to make it. You know, humanity is going down a very, very bad track. And if you look at sustainability and environmental damage and globalisation, overpopulation and disease, etc., things are looking bad. And my response is, no, I don't think there's going to be this meltdown. Rather, I think that humans will continue to innovate and innovate and innovate. That's what we've always done. So the minute we can't breathe the air anymore, someone will create a gas mask that will sell at a market price, and everyone will clap and they'll win a prize, and then we'll all walk around with gas masks from now on. Or we'll start growing beef that doesn't have a cow attached to it, it's just meat, and we'll go, that's brilliant, let's win another prize. And one day we'll look around and we'll be living in a world potentially with no trees and no animals and pieces of meat growing in laboratories. And what I am interested in is, what is the future we want to create for humanity on every level, and how do we, instead of creating these incremental improvements, innovations and change to address these issues as we see them, how do we create a systems-based overview that actually can look to the common good and try and attain it? So I'd welcome your views on that.
Well, for starters, we start thinking long-term, and we educate people so that we don't need to wait to lose our breath collectively and rely on gas masks, but maybe we can clean up the atmosphere. We can go to Mars and terraform Mars and maybe learn there how to come back and terraform Earth. We can perhaps educate people to think scientifically and understand statistics and probability so that we can make better, more scientifically based predictions about the impact, not just of what we're doing. It's not just that human beings are evil, but make predictions about what's happening, whether it's us or cows spewing methane all over the place, or whatever. Thinking long-term and education are the two most important. And one problem with Silicon Valley is it's spending so much of its enormous talents on helping people play games and pick better videos. Yeah, and you know who you are. You could be working in health.
No, I agree. I think there's an opportunity. Again, I'm a long-run optimist, so I do believe that over time we're going to address the issues that we're facing. I certainly believe that a lot of the change that we're seeing today is negative change. Again, the political system, I believe we are on a trajectory of negative change. But I don't think that's sustainable. And I think ultimately it hinges on this long-term view and a question of narratives. Again, I go back to narratives and the need for more opportunity-based narratives. I mean, I'm struck by, if we look at the global population, the question of 6 or 7 billion, how do you describe them? Is it 6 to 7 billion mouths to feed? Or is it 6 to 7 billion minds that can be tapped into and that can unfold in ways that are beyond expectation?
That are all about to be using cell phones and be connected.
Connected with each other. And so I think the frame we take and apply, and I think it's ultimately shaped by the narratives that we have at an individual level. I mean, I often ask people, what's your personal narrative? Institutional narratives, what's the narrative of the company or the institution you're with? And the national or political narrative, what's our narrative as a country, is going to shape whether that change is positive or negative.
I wanted to riff on that last question and also go back to John, an earlier thread that you talked about, which is the threat narrative.
Can you just say who you are there?
Sure, it was Michael Moon. You know, you cited a couple of examples in Egypt, the narrative of the threat of a dictator. But when you have someone in power for 30 years whose security forces can come and nab you off the street at any time, that seems like a legitimate threat. On the other hand, when you have the Republicans saying that Obama is a socialist, Marxist, Kenyan Nazi who wants to steal your guns and kill your grandmother, that would be hilarious if so many people didn't actually believe it. And then you look at the other side of the threat narrative in our political culture, climate change is really going to suck, and it is, and we're already seeing the effects of that. So it seems like the threat narrative suffers from a false equivalency, and I'm wondering how we can direct change in the right direction when it seems like we have so many people with such a problem of dealing with reality, or at least separating it from the other thing.
So I don't want to in any way equate or trivialize the threats that people in many parts of the world are facing with the kinds of threats that we're talking about in the United States. And I take your point. There are very different threats, some of them very imminent and where it's truly life and death as to whether you're going to survive or not. Having said that, I would even say in those situations where it's life and death threat, if all you're focused on is dealing with the threat, you'll maybe win the short-term battle, but I don't think you're going to win the long-term war. And the long-term, again, hinges on having some reasonably compelling and evocative view of what the opportunity is. What's going to replace this dictator? Because I think we're seeing in many parts of the Middle East the experience where there was short-term success in toppling the dictators or toppling the corrupt regimes. But the open question is, are we just going to go back to another dictator, or are we going to have some kind of sustainable political system that creates opportunity for all the people? And so even in that threat-based situation, my own view is focus on the opportunity.
Yeah.
Understand the threat and be realistic about the threat, but focus on the opportunity.
But I think his question was more about the fake threats and how do we get people to have a better grasp on reality. And I mean, fundamentally, how do we get people to listen? And you know, if we up here could figure out how to solve all the world's problems, we'd be doing pretty well.
Yes.
But
in the next 5 minutes.
It's a feature of American political life now that people are not listening, and they're catering to short-term wins. And I mean, my friends, you know, they tweet the silliest things about politicians rather than, and that's something that this culture is creating. It's this sort of gotcha. You know, we can make a joke about a politician. Well.
Right. Yeah.
You know, which comes to you need a long-term coherent narrative about the country rather than about the peculiarities of the people thrown up by this political system.
And again, to be an optimist, I'll say that while we're locked into these threat-based narratives right now, I think there's reasonable evidence that the American public hungers for an opportunity-based narrative.
They hunger for good food, but they still eat garbage. I mean,
but listen me out. In the sense that, so in my view, the two most successful politicians in the past 15, 20 years were Ronald Reagan and Obama in his first campaign. And what were the factors that mobilized the energy and excitement of the American public in both of those situations? Both of them mastered an opportunity-based narrative.
Right. So I agree with you, but I have to argue that the goal is not successful politicians. It's actually a capable, honest government that does the job. Yes. Having great politicians, it's nice, but our challenge as a country is having a government that works.
Yes.
And one that the people support, knowing what it is that it does, rather than half the people saying, keep government hands off my Medicare. Right. And the other half kind of whatever. It's just politicians is not the problem. It's the actual reality. I mean, I'm a long-term optimist too. I figure, if we're all wearing gas masks, we'll create a market for gas masks. Or if half of us die in a nuclear holocaust, the other half of us will know what to do because it will be pretty obvious. But I'd rather not. Any
Hi,
more?
I might be your last one. My name's Bonnie Roloffs, and I work for Shell. And originally, where I was when I wanted to get the mic was to share a thought that for your taxonomy about 2 types of passion, I've had a chance to work all over the world for Shell in many third world countries. And so I'm thinking of the thousands of people that I've worked with. And I'd say that there's a third type of passion. And it's a passion that's a blending of the two. It's people that are true believers that have developed a skill to let go of I'm right, you're wrong, and they can listen and be curious to see that multiple truths can exist, and then they can step back and choose to accept which one that they want to hold on to. So I wanted to just share that with you.
Excellent.
One more that's a question?
There's one at the very back, I think. Oh, one over here.
Hi, my name is Mario Landau Holtzworth, and I'm from EverCharge. I studied economics, and I was really interested in in game theory and understanding complex situations. And one thing that was discussed was that when governments from around the world get together to negotiate a climate treaty, that no government is going to be willing to cut carbon emissions unless other governments have already committed to do so. So I guess my question to you is not just that situation, but other situations that require multiple parties to get meaningful change. How would you suggest addressing those changes? What factors are necessary?
I would say you need to reach out to their people. And, I mean, the real solution to all of this is an invasion from Mars. Beyond that, try to position climate change as an invasion from Mars and get people to encourage their governments to work together. Get people to understand that we are all paying for the externalities caused by, it's not the behavior of the Brazilian government, it's the behavior of Brazilian corporations that are regulated by the Brazilian government. For example, explain the situation better, which is a kind of lame response, but that's the reality. And then motivate the people. But first you have to educate them, as I said earlier, and that's another challenge. Is someone going to? Oh,
yep.
Okay.
Question. I'm kind of a big follower of Stuart Brand. You know, I find he sees things in big pictures and trends over time. And one thing I tend to feel that goes on is there's a lot of noise out there, both in the political realm and in the environmental realm. And if you look at the noise, it's time to go back in your cave and hide. But if you look at the historic trends of where things have come from and where we're going, it's mind-blowing. I mean, you're seeing Brazil now becoming part of the developed world. You're seeing South Africa through all its horrible times, really getting its act together. And as these countries economically connect and globally connect through the internet, and we connect to them, it's dynamically changing things. I mean, even in China, in spite of its pollution, they're working on the pollution problem. It's not perfect. So I see this passion for optimism in those places. And when I've traveled to Indonesia and Thailand, and you see people, they have nothing, but the opportunities right there, and they see it, and they're going for it. And I'd just like you to comment on this bigger picture view of passion and change for how other folks in the world see it.
You know, I think, one of the reasons that I'm so intrigued with the notion of passion is, at least in the forms that I'm talking about, and I think there are different forms, the passion of the explorer, by definition, is a long-term view of the world. You're in this for your life, and you're thinking about it constantly in that term. And so I think that that's one of the reasons. It's a countervailing force to, again, this natural tendency that we all have as human beings in times of high uncertainty to shrink our time horizons. And I think we're lost if we shrink our time horizons. The only way we're going to move forward is if we go back to that long-term view and the opportunities that certainly exist if you take that long-term view. So.
Speaking of time horizons, it says our time is up.
Yes, indeed.
I just want to say that courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. And I would say passion isn't not perceiving the downside, but working to make the upside happen regardless.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.